So I rise today as the Senate's on the verge of passing this first comprehensive reform of our nation's primary workforce development program in about 16 years to say that I appreciate, again, the fact that members on both sides of the aisle have worked with me and others to put some reforms into this program to ensure that it works better for our workers and for our competitiveness and our ability to actually get this economy moving again. We do have this weak economy, and sometimes we're sort of numb to it. We forget that this is not just a typical recovery, it is a very slow recovery. In fact, by measures of growth in the economy or unemployment or other measures, it's the weakest economic recovery we've had really since the Great Depression. We've become numb, I think, to some of the disappointing news. Almost 20 million Americans out of work. 317,000 of our friends and neighbors in Ohio are now unemployed, and millions more have given up looking for work. In fact, the number of people who have given up looking for work is growing, and so it's a high percentage. Those who have given up looking for work, you'd have to go back 34 years ago to the 1970s to find similar numbers of people, percentage of the workforce, who were just not looking at all. For men, they say it may go back to the 1940s. We started keeping track of this. So we've got problems. And we've got problems that can be solved in part by closing what's called the skills gap. In other words, there are a whole bunch of jobs that are open, but they can't be filled because people don't have the skills to take those jobs. By the way, you don't have to take my word for it. Will.I.am of the Black Eyed Peas is someone I don't often have the opportunity to quote on the floor of the United States Senate. But he was at the White House recently. In addition to his work in the music industry, he's also known for his work with kids back in his hometown of Boyle Heights, California. And a lot of that's focused on jobs training, skills training. And during an event at the White House a couple weeks ago, I saw that he said the following: there's so many jobs in America we can't fill because people aren't brought up to speed with the skill sets that are needed. Will.I.am is right. And the numbers back him up, by the way. 4.5 million jobs today remain open and unfilled in America. And yet we have these high levels of unemployment and all these people who have left the workforce altogether. What's going on? And part of it is we just don't have the skills to be able to fill those jobs. In Ohio today, if you go on the website, Jobs Ready website, you will see 140,000 jobs being advertised. And yet we got about 400,000 people out of work. And if you look at these jobs, a lot of them require advanced manufacturing skills, information technology skills, medical bioscience skills for healthcare workers. We've got to do better in terms of filling that gap so that American workers are able to meet the demands of the 21st century. There's a skills gap report by the Manufacturing Institute that came out recently. It said, based on a poll they did, that 74% of manufacturers, 74% are experiencing workforce shortages or skill deficiencies that keep them from expanding their operations and improving productivity. 74% say we're looking for better skills to be able to fill these jobs. We could be doing so much better than we are to close that skills gap. For too many Americans, the only jobs that are available are those they don't have the skills and qualifications to be able to fill. So the federal government spends a lot of money on this. This is not for lack of funds. The federal government spends between $15, $18 billion a year on these federal worker retraining programs. As some of you know, there are 47 different programs spread over 9 different departments and agencies. And we need to do more to try to consolidate and improve those programs. But in the meanwhile, let's do what we can, and that's what this legislation does. The Government Accounting Office, the GAO, which looks at all the federal agencies to decide how they're doing, they spend a lot of time looking at this. They have said that some of that money, the $18 billion I talked about, up to $18 billion, our taxpayer money that does provide the funding for these 47 different programs over 9 departments and agencies, are not working very well. They say 45 of the programs, 45 of the 47 overlapped with at least one other program. Only 5 had conducted an impact study of their efforts since 2004, meaning the outcome or performance measures you would expect are not being done. Only 5, they said, had conducted an impact study of the efforts since 2004. GAO concluded, and I quote, "Little is known about the effectiveness of most of these programs." But actually, I think we do know something about the effectiveness because these millions of unfilled jobs are an indictment of the programs. In other words, we should be doing a better job getting the skills that we need to fill these jobs if we're spending $15, $18 billion of hard-earned taxpayers' money on it. I hear this story all across Ohio. I know my colleagues hear it across their states. I hear it from workers. I hear it from businesses. I hear it from educators. People are frustrated, and there's good reason for it. I think the way that Washington has handled workforce development is simply inefficient. It's not working well. I think it's unfair to employers who have open positions because they can't find qualified candidates to fill them. It's certainly unfair to taxpayers who send their money to Washington believing their government will be good steward of those funds, and we're going to use it effectively for worker retraining, getting the money into the hands of people to train them up for jobs that are actually out there. And I think it's unfair to, of course, the millions of Americans who'd like to build a better life for their families and yet find that federal resources allocated to them aren't getting the job done. Because we believe we can do better, this Congress is going to act today. The Senate and the House together are working on this issue, which is good. It's bicameral. It's bipartisan. I've joined with Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado on what's called the Career Act. And the Career Act is included in most part in this legislation. And the Career Act first calls for a reduction in the wasteful and inefficient overlap we talked about in the system. I'm pleased to see the legislation before us today trims 15 programs from our nation's workforce development program. I think this is a good start. I also think we can do even more. Understanding there were a lot of constraints, different points of view on this, we need to consolidate further, in my view. Second, we called for an increased focus on helping unemployed workers attain high-quality credentials that give them a leg up in the local job market. I'm pleased this bill includes our provisions that require now these local boards, the workforce investment boards, to give priority consideration to programs that lead to credentials that are in demand in their local areas. We worked hard to include a provision requiring the state and local boards to provide specific strategies for helping folks attain high-quality credentials. These are industry-recognized credentials that are in demand, that are portable, meaning they can move from state to state, and that help them move up the career ladder. That's important because we know that these credentials, based on all the research, are critical to getting people into these jobs. Third, we call for a new and innovative accountability program in the system called Pay for Success. Currently, the workforce development programs provide funding, again, regardless of performance, so long as certain rules are followed or input requirements are met. Not output, but input. This has resulted in this unaccountability that the GAO talked about, many complacent programs that have fallen short. Pay for Success is an approach that turns this model on its head by linking payments to outcomes, to actual performance measures. Job training service providers who do well will be rewarded under this model, and those who fail to deliver results are going to be held accountable. I'm pleased that, again, this underlying legislation, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act before us today, includes these Pay for Success provisions that allow local workforce investment boards to use their formula funds to engage in Pay for Success contracts. Again, step in the right direction. I'd like to go even further, but I think this is historic, and it's very important. Finally, we called for access to better data to make it less difficult and expensive for state and local officials to assess the effectiveness of their training activities in real time. I'm pleased this legislation includes the provisions for a study of how to access better data that can help the system deliver better results for taxpayers and unemployed. Again, that's part of the Career Act. These four reforms can help change lives and turn around our economy. They're the kind of reforms that can empower millions of Americans to get the kind of jobs that do fund retirements, that do buy homes, that do pay for college educations. And these reforms, in my view, are long overdue. We live in a dynamic, ever-changing economy, no question about it. We've got to be sure that our workforce is also dynamic and ever-changing to be able to meet the demands. We shouldn't be held back by a workforce development system that hasn't been reauthorized since 1998. And for reference, that's the year that Google was first incorporated as a company. So I strongly support the underlying legislation. Again, I commend my colleagues from both sides of the aisle. I see some of them here today on the floor for their work. I thank them for working with Senator Michael Bennet and myself to incorporate some of the bipartisan Career Act provisions. At a time when the two parties in Washington have been at odds on how to finally get our economy moving again, this is a jobs bill that's a win-win. It's a win for everyone, especially those Americans who are still looking for a job and those businesses who are desperate to fill the skills gap that they see.